Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is Avodah Zarah Daf Ayin, Avodah Zarah 70. And the Gemara is going to give 11 stories today about if an idolater has access to the wine or whether or not the wine is going to be prohibited. And Rava gives the rulings and Rava permits it. And Rashi tells us when Rava permits it, wherever it permits it, it's permitted even to drink, because he didn't touch it. Whenever he prohibits it even to have benefit from it. In all these cases, the law is like Rava. So we're on the top of 78. The daf is dedicated for Shmir for Chayalim. It's all for the Shvayim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. 3 lines from the top. Ubesa, there was a house, Tava Yosef Chamra, the Israel, that there was wine of a Jew in this house. Oh, Likochavim. The idolater goes into the house, closes the door behind him. And there was a crack in the door, maybe a keyhole in the door. They didn't really have keys like that, but there was a crack in the door. So we say, people. So we say, Ishtakech over Kochavim. When he saw the idolater, the idolater is sitting amongst the barrels. So Amarava called the Lahade Biza Shari, the High Gisa Aser. So Rava says anything that's directly opposite the crack is going to be permitted, but on either side of it will be prohibited. Boker Tov Habs, Shkoyach to you. I want to just say, okay, so we said Rashi qualifies, it says it's permitted even to drink. And when he says it's prohibited, it would be prohibited even to have benefit. But there's another leniency within Rashi, Bahai Gisa Asor. If you want to follow along, it's the third line of the Rashi. Rashi says it's prohibited on either side even to have benefit. But we have this concept, we've had it before in our tractate twice, and now we're going to have it on our page. What kind of idolater are we talking about here? Where he's not worried that if they catch him, he's going to appear like a thief, because he owns a portion of the wine. Because if he would be caught, he would be accused of being a thief. It's all permitted because he would be afraid to touch anything. He could be caught at any time. So therefore, that's what we're talking about here, where the guy is unafraid. But if he's afraid, then even on the sides it'd be permitted. Okay, so that's an important qualification. Second case, we're around 8 lines from the top. There was wine of the Jew that was in a house. The Jew was on the top floor. And the idolater is on the bottom floor. Shamu called Tigray. He heard that they were fighting. There was something going on the street. Nafake Kadim. He went out and to look at it. So idolater came and closed the door. She closed the door behind him. I remember one time reading about Rabbi Soloveitchik tells the story about, I think it was his grandfather was studying Torah, and he imagined a scene where his wife comes home, tells him the Mashiach is coming, and he burnt the soup. He forgot about the soup because he was so excited about the Mashiach. But he heard something outside. He ran outside to see what's going on, and the idolater comes in and shuts the door. So the idolater has seclusion, yichud, with the wine. Amarava chamra shari. The wine will be permitted, meimar amar, because the idolater will be afraid to touch it, because he'll say, Kehecha Tekadim. He said, because the idolater will say, Kehecha Tekadim Asai Ana Kadam V'Asa Yisrael. Just like I got here first, just like I ran in here, also the Jew got here first. V'Yasef Belio, and I'll be sitting on the top floor. But Kapuzzle, you'll see what's going on. Third case, Ahu Ushpiza. There was an inn. Ushpiza is from the Sukkos, where we have the ushpizin, the guest. So there was an inn, that there was the wine of a Jew. Davi Yosef Beidani. So there was a guest, and he was in the place where there was one and the Jew, and then they found that this idolatrous guest was sitting amongst the wines. Says if the guy would be caught there, he would be accused of being a thief. It'll be permitted, otherwise prohibited, because if he's a thief, he's afraid to touch things. Fourth case, so Beisa Daviyasa Bechamra. There was a house, there was wine. They found the idolater walking amongst the barrels. If he has an excuse to be there, then counterintuitively, if he has a good excuse for being there, chamra aser, then the wine is prohibited because he'll be arrogant enough to say, I'm allowed a beer. Velo, but if he has no excuse for being there, chamra shari, then the wine will be permitted. Why is that? Because he'll be afraid to touch anything. So we'd have to figure out like what's the slight distinction between all these cases. First of all, these could have been actual cases, so there's not necessarily different. But otherwise, we could do some work on it to figure out what's the actual distinction between these cases. But it seems like these were separate rulings, so they just were recorded here. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, so let's challenge this last ruling. Nino apundak. Let's say he locked up his apundak is like an inn. It's also a modern Hebrew word, like a little bodega or something. Let's say he closed up his little store, O Shamor, O Shamor, or if he says to the idolater, watch my store, also it's prohibited. So my love alfagav deleish even though he has no excuse for being there. No, but these leish no, the idolater had excuse, that's why it's prohibited. Next case. The Jew and the idolater were sitting there drinking wine together, which is the whole reason why we have this prohibition is we don't want that. So Shama Yisrael, listen to this beautiful example. Isn't this beautiful example? Shama Yisrael called Tsaluye Bekinishta. So the Jew's sitting there having a drink with the idolater, and then he hears the sound of the prayers in the synagogue. He gets up and runs to daven. He puts down his beer, not his beer, his wine, leaves it with the idolater. He says, I'm running out of here. I'm a Rava Chamra Shari. The wine is permitted. The wine is permitted, says Rava, because the idolater says to himself, oh, he'll remember his wine in return. The idolater doesn't believe that the Jew is going to run away from him and go to the prayers. He doesn't believe it. He says he'll come back to the wine. But we know that the Yid is going to go and daven. He's going to forget the wine, but the idolater doesn't believe it. Next case, also a beautiful case. So there was a Jew and idolater who were sitting in a boat. Shama Yisrael called Shifure, the Bei Shimshei. They heard the sound of the shofar. God willing, soon this morning will sound the shofar. But this case, this was the sound of the shofar of Bein Hashmashos, of Erev Shabbos, Rashi says. They used to blow the shofar to distinguish between Kodesh and Chol. So we see what's the purpose of the shofar? To distinguish between what's holy and what's not. That's another reason why we blow the shofar. We're trying to separate ourselves from the Chol and make ourselves Kodesh when we blast the shofar and El. So it's not just a minhag or a custom. It's also to elevate ourselves spiritually. That's what the idea is, of the shofar blowing. But anyway, the Jew heard the shofar and he ran because it's Shabbos. So Nafak V'azal, I'm a Rava. So he left the idolater with the wine. Says the Rava, Chamra Shari. The wine is permitted. Why? Meimar Amar, the idolater will say, Hashta mitkarei l'chamrei. No, the Jew will remember his wine, V'hadar and he'll come back for it. And Mishum Shabbos, I say, no, he can't come back for his wine. It's Shabbos Kodesh. The idolater says, we're not worried about that. Amarli, Isur Giura, Isur, the convert, once told me, says Rava, Ki Avinam Bar Miyusan, before I converted, when I was still Aramean, Amrina, we used to say Yehudai lo mantra Shabbasa. The idolaters could see through Jews. They said the Jews don't keep Shabbos. The mintra Shabbasa, because if they were really keeping the Shabbos, Gama Kisei Kamishtacha Bashuka. Look how many wallets we would have found in the market. Everybody remember that Shabbos, they would drop their wallet because they can't carry the sphere, but they don't realize the Inhu or Yadu, they don't know the sphere on Rabbi Yitzchak that we had a head there. We hold like Rabbi Yitzchak. I'm Rabbi Yitzchak. Amotzi Kis B'Shabbos, Melicho Pachos Michos Pachos Midamad Amos. If you find the wallet and you can't carry, but you can walk less, then stop. Walk less than Dawad Amos, then stop. And so therefore, you don't have what's called an Akira picking it up from 4 cubits to the other because you're stopping in between. So therefore, it'd be permitted. No, you just wait. Rashi says here, the omed lafush, and you stand and you rest for a period of time. And that's not called an akira, of picking it up from the beginning of the 4 cubits to the end. So that's what you do. You pick it up and you wait, and then you stop. So this is where you find the wallet. You find a lot of money. Then you're able to pick it up, and this is a way. Okay, I'll just tell you a joke I once heard. That the 3 Hasidim are arguing who is the greater Rebbe. One says, did I tell you this? One says, my Rebbe is the greatest. Says, why? He says, one time it was raining and he was walking outside. He said, rain to the left, rain to the right. And he walked right down the middle. The next one says, my Rebbe is the greatest. Why? One time he walked out, it was snowing. And he said, snow to the left, snow to the right. He walked right down the middle. Everyone says, my Rebbe is the greatest. One time walking outside, we found a few $100 bills in the middle of the street, and it was Shabbos. And my Rebbe said, Shabbos to the left, Shabbos to the right. And he picked it up and he went. But he probably stopped every 2 amos to rest, and then it will be okay. That's what our Gemara is teaching us. So, who, next case, who Aryeh, Davi Noam B'Matzarata. There was a lion who was roaring. The lion was roaring in the wine vat. Shama Ove Kochavim, the author heard this. Tasha Beni Dani, he went and hid amongst the barrels. Amarava Chamra Shari. The wine is permitted. Meimar Amar, because the author would say, Tashina Ana, Tashna Nami Yisrael Acharai. Just like I'm hiding here, so is the Jew. And Vikachazili, you'll see me. I'm going to pause for a second. We say in the Haftorah, Amos says in chapter 3 of the Haftorah, Aryeh Sha'ag, Milo Yirah. The lion roars, who will not be afraid? Hashem Elokim Diber, Milo Yinaveh. I think that's the pasuk. If Hashem speaks, who will not prophesy? So where is that Haftorah? That is the Haftorah for Parashas Vayeshev. So we know that if a lion roars, everybody will be afraid. Just so too, when Hashem speaks, we all have to hear, we all have to do our responsibility. Hanu Ganavi Desalki Pumpadisa. So the robbers went to Pumpadisa. Pasul Chavisa Tuva. They opened up a lot of barrels. Amarava Chamrashari. The wine is still permitted. My time Ruba Ganave Yisrael Nenu. In Pumpadisa, most of the robbers were Jews, unfortunately. So therefore, fortunately, the wine is kosher. Ruba Ganave Yisrael Nenu. Most of them are Jews, so therefore it's okay. And also, it happened in Nardai, and Shmuel said it's permitted. Kaman, who is it like? Who are they ruling that it's permitted? Kirebi Eliezer, the Amar Safek Bia Torah, like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that listen, if you're not sure, Safek Bia, you're not sure who came in contact with something, it's going to be not Tamei, it's Tahora. What's this case? This is the case from the Mishnah in chapter 6 of Taharos. The Tanana, Nichnas Lavika B'Mosa Geshamim. Person goes into a valley in the winter. V'tuma b'sadeh ponis. And there's tuma in one field. V'amar halachti v'makom halaz. So he says, I walked in that area. I just don't know if I came into that field or not. So there was a lot of fields next to each other, and and he didn't know, and it was a private domain because it was the winter, so it was sewn up, and people don't walk there, so it would be suffic tumah to be stringent. But he doesn't know if he walked into that field or not. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Suffolk Biatar. Rabbi Eliezer says since he doesn't know if he came in, he's tar. Suffolk Magav, if he's not sure if he touched it, Tameh. If he says he entered the field, but I don't know if I touched this tum or not, then it'll be Tameh. But if he doesn't know if he entered the field, then it'll be Tahor. So this idea here that the idolater, we don't know who opened it, then it's going to be tahar. But if we know the idolater opened it, we just don't know if he touched it, then it would be tamei. Mar says no. Shani also in that case is different. Kiven the ika de pasli b'shumemona avoy svek sveka. No, the case of the barrels is we might not necessarily have to be lenient like Rabbi Eliezer, but the case of the barrels is what's called a svek sveka. It's a double doubt. Why? Because we first of all don't know if the Jew opened it or the idolater. And even if we want to say we don't rule like Rabbi Eliezer, that we can be lenient and assume the Jew opened it. Nevertheless, even if the idolater opened it, we can say we're not sure if he touched it or not. And then, since it's a svek sveka, even the Rabbanon would be lenient in this case. And when did the rabbis argue with Rabbi Eliezer? That is only where the entire field was filled with tumah, and if he had entered the field, it would for sure become tumah. Where there's only one suffix. But in case it was svek sveka, the rabbis themselves would be lenient. Well, in our day and in Pumpadisa, they both say the majority are Jews, the majority of thieves. Shmuel says, Chamar Shari, but in our day it's permitted also. No, because it's presumably with the same principle of Rava that it was the majority of thieves in that. Oh, so let's see. Chamar Shari, he says the wood wine is permitted. Let's see what here. No, Rashi says. Oh, so it's a different daf. The Tosfos above Basra. I don't have that here. Okay, so what does it say? Tell it to us. Okay. So you have to follow Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, that's Tosfos. Okay, shkoyach. Thank you for that. I hear Rabbi's. Exactly. Well, we had the majority of thieves. So he says he didn't have the majority of thieves there. He just had the majority of Jews. So therefore, he has to rely on Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so that's a nice hayara. So the top of Ayin Amabeit. He Rabisa Dishtakach Beidani. So they found a Rabisa. Rashi says that this is a Rabisa is a tinokes bas of Ovedes Kocham, a young girl who's an idolater. The word Rabisa in the Shas doesn't necessarily mean a young girl. Remember, we had the case where we talk about Sodom. It appears twice in the Shas. And we talked about that. Why was Sodom destroyed? Al Iske Reba, because of the cries of a Reba, a young woman who was killed because she was killed with honey. Rashi seems to be saying that this is specifically a young girl because she doesn't know about Yayin Nesach. And so therefore she wouldn't have touched it. But if she would be older, we wouldn't be lenient. But Tosfos doesn't say that way. Tosfos disagrees. It says it could even be an older girl. And that's really what Rabisa well, a Reba is a young woman, but a Rabisa maybe could be a young girl, like Rashi's saying. Hey, Rabisa, deshtachach tahaves beidani. They found a young girl amongst the barrels. Bavis Nikita ufe biade, and she was holding some like foam of the wine in her hands. Amarava chamar shari. The wine is still permitted. Why? Amar migaba de chavisa shakalte. She probably took it from the back of the barrel, so she didn't touch the wine. Afagav deleka. So even though there's no more, Amar Sremuye Yisrael. We'll say no. She got it all off. Next case, Upumusa. This was a general, an idolater, the Salkan Ardai. He came to Nardai. Pascal Chavisa Tuva. He opened up a lot of barrels. Kyasar Avdimi, Amar Uvdavik, Hamed Rebbe Elazar Vishara. Rebbe Elazar allowed it in Nardai. And he says that there was an incident that was also in front of Rebbe Elazar, and he allowed it. Vishara, Veloya Dana, and I don't know why. So Rebbe Elazar is in Israel, wasn't in Nardai. He says, I don't know why he allowed it. Even Shem the several Rebbe Eliezer. Does he hold like Rebbe Eliezer that Safek Bia is permitted? Damar Safek Bia Tower. Even Shem the Savar, Ruba da Azli Bahade for Musa Yisrael Ninu. Or maybe he felt that the majority of the people there were Jewish in that army. So if that's the case, if the majority of the people were Jewish, so I guess this is a question going back to what Jeff was saying. This is a question on Shmuel. If the majority of the people are Jewish, why do we say that this is a suffix? If we want to say that, why are you saying it's suffix bia, suffix mago? It's not a doubt whether or not they came. It's doubt whether or not they touched it. Because if we're going to say that the majority of the people there are clearly idolaters, so for sure, they were there. So it's not a question of whether or not they came in, because that would be lenient, but it's a question of whether or not they touched it. So the Gemara says, no. Kivan de mipatre tuva ema daita de mamona paslu ukasafik biadami. No, since they opened up many of them, we have to assume that maybe they opened it up for the money, and so we're not sure if they even. It's like a suffix bia, where Rabbi Eliezer allows it. I mean to say that just like it's just like we're going to say below that since they're involved in a war, they're not going to go around touching the wine. Also here, since they're looking for money, they're not going to stop and do their libation. Misubisa is like a woman who sells wine. The Masrala Iquida, the Masrala Aquida, that they gave to her a key. Then it says maftecha, maftech is also a key, so the Bach takes out the word. So there was a woman who sold wine, and she gave the key to her wine shop to the idolater to watch, and the idolater had the keys, but she still didn't have permission to go in. Her job was to watch the keys. So one up to one is prohibited. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. So we have to change the text a little bit. So this incident came in front of us in the base medrash. The Amru, and they said, she doesn't have permission to go in. She's responsible to watch the keys. But that doesn't mean she has reshus to go in, so the wine is permitted. Amar Abaye, Afana Namitinina, we have a similar case. And most of Amaretz. So let's say you give your key to the Amaretz, Taros of Tahoros. So then the Taharos, the food items are still Tahar. Even though the Amaretz is suspected, if he would touch it and make it Tameh, we don't want to assume that he touched it. You only gave it to him so we could watch the keys. So therefore, why do we even need to go to the base medrash? If we're saying by the case of the Amaretz, it's tahor that he didn't touch it. Yayin nesach mibaye. Do you even need to tell us about yayin nesach? Means say taharos is harder to allow, and we still allow it in that case. It's more likely that the Amoritz touched it than that the idolater did yayin nesach. Well, Meimra says the Gemara did taharos, so he made me yayin nesach. You want to say the case of the taharos is even stronger than the yayin nesach? Is that what you're saying? In Gemara says yes. I'll prove it to you. The itmar. Because we learned in the base medrash, Chotzer Cholka b'mesipas. Let's say you have a courtyard that was divided up via a mesipas. Mesipas is, Rashi says, a very small partition, and the Amoritz is on one side, and the Jew is the Chaver is on the other side. Amarav Taros of Tameos. Rav says that the taros become tamei. But if it would be idolater, it wouldn't make a yain nesach. You see, Rav says that the case of Yam Haaretz is more likely to be a violation in the case of yain nesach. Rabbi Yochanan Amarav Taros of Taros. Rabbi Yochanan says, well, even by the Yam Haaretz, we're going to say it's tahar. So the Gemara is going to challenge Rav, who says that Taros of Artemeos. If that's the case, what about the Bryce that says apnimis meitzi apnimis shel chaver? Let's say the inner part, the inner courtyard belongs to the chaver, and the outer courtyard belongs to the amaret. We could also say the panemius, the person who is true inside, that represents a chaver, and the chitzonius, someone who's external, is just the idolater, or not the idolater, the amaret. So osa chaver shotel sham peros, that he's allowed to leave his fruits in the outer courtyard, even though the amaret has access to it. Miniach sham kelim. They put his utensils there. So kashal Rav, because he's allowed to put his food in the court and utensils in the courtyard of the idolater without a concern. No, that case is different because if the idolater would touch it, he would be, if not the idolater, if the Amaretz would touch it, they would grab him as a thief, so he'd be afraid. In this case, though, he wouldn't be afraid in the case of the courtyard. Meaning to say, in the case here, he's putting it in his own courtyard, the chaver. So the Amaretz is not going to stick his hand into the chaver's courtyard. But in the earlier case, it was one courtyard, it was just a little like pot of plants in between. So the Amaretz wouldn't be afraid. Tashma, so the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, remember, says that it's permitted. I'm showing them Omer Gago Shal Chaver U'Mala Migago Shal Amaretz. And let's say they're on the roof, and their roofs were basically like yards. So the roof of the chaver is above the roof of the amaretz. Also, chaver shoteach sham peros. The chaver could put out its fruit there. Meniach sham kelim, put out his utensils. But as long as the amaretz can't reach it, but if he could reach it, it would be a problem. Kashel Rabbi Yochanan, so it's a challenge Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Shani asam nislei l'shtamute. No, that case is different. The reason why it's going to be prohibited is because he has a good excuse. He can always come up with some excuse why he's there. He'll say, I'm just measuring, like the area because I want to do some light construction. So the Gemara says, okay, let's challenge Rav. Tashma, Gago Shachaver, Betzad, Gago Shamaretz. Also, chaver shoteach sham peros niach sham kelim v'apishiyad sham aretz magiya sham. So it says that the roof of the chaver next to the roof of the amaretz, the chaver can stick his hand on the roof, even though the amaretz stand reaches there. So kashil Rav. So it's in fact the question on Rav. So it says Rav, Amachar Rav, Lavika Rabbi Shimon Gamliel the Kaikavas. I had the earlier brisa which holds like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So you came up with the ukimta that he had an excuse, but I don't buy that would be a good excuse. I would say that proves it's not allowed. It makes the taros tameos. Anadamri Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. I pass him with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and so therefore Rav says I have a shita who I could hold like. Okay, so we'll stop here, Baruch Hashem, and pick this up. We'll resume after davening. Shkoyach to everybody.